Yeah.
Did you have anything you wanted to start with, Trina, or no?
No, I think we wanted to start with the CIP because
Okay.
James hadn't had an opportunity to go through his CIPs or his property improvements. Now we figured out why the Public Works part went so quickly during our all-day session. We didn't do the major equipment. Normally, we did the major equipment. So we got a little stuff, a bit of stuff to go through, but James and Steve prepared some multiple maps. One is in the document already, and one they just handed out.
Two of them, actually, we just handed
Two of
out.
them.
Yeah. What we handed you is a 2018 and a 2019, more of a comprehensive what's in the CIP, you know, not just street projects, but, you know, property improvements projects, park improvement projects, you know, some TIF-related projects and things like that. So it's, you know, projects that could be defined geographically in the 2018 or 2019 CIP are depicted on the two maps that I handed out before we got started today. The map in the front of your CIP book is the 5-year comprehensive street reconstruction map. So that's kind of the 5-year roadmap, if you will, that we've talked about for the last several years, as far as what streets are planned for reconstruction and, you know, how we're working into certain areas as we go. I think in previous years, you know, there have been a question, well, why Bay Shore and Lake before CP? Well, because we needed to get there with utilities. So, you know, that that 5-year comprehensive street map kind of shows that how we're working towards certain areas and, you know, what ties together with what. But then the two individual 18 and 19 maps kind of give a little bit more expanded look at what's in each of those years.
So on 2018, James, I'm seeing here, like the Middle Village neighborhood, and I've had some neighbors ask me, why, you know, there might be sidewalk rehab when we just had our streets done and sidewalks.
The street rehab zones are kind of predefined, and we move through the area, or, I'm sorry, yes, sidewalk. I'm sorry, thank you. The sidewalk rehab zones, I'm sorry, are kind of predefined to try to move through the entire city in about a 10-year cycle. You know, certainly in 18 and in 19, you know, there are some areas that we have, you know, extensively done some reconstruction in recent years. So there, you know, on those streets, we would expect there to be minimal or no need to do things, but, you know, that's, you know, we're looking at, and I don't know if you want to get into how we're kind of looking at analyzing and shuffling the sidewalk rehab zones a little bit if we can.
Sure. Right now, while our goal is a 10-year cycle, we're at 11 years for getting through the city. The 18, 19, and 20 areas are essentially, if you would take the area that's this year and project the northern boundary limit due east, that is about the cutoff of the 20 area. So we've got three years in this very small geographic area where we've hit very hard with reconstructions. We're anticipating that the sidewalk, the amount of work in those areas should be less, and I have staff looking currently to see if we can expand the 18 area, staying within our budget number at this point in time, to try to move 18, 19, and 20 into a 2-year combined project, and hence then get us to our 10-year goal while not needing to expend additional dollars in one of the years, and hopefully then get us to back to a 10-year cycle and allow us to take care of some of these smaller areas that, as you said, we've hit pretty hard with reconstruction areas, and hopefully don't have a lot of sidewalk to do.
Gotcha.
We're not doing them twice. How's that?
Probably not a good idea.
If, you know, if they don't meet the criteria to require replacement, being, you know, the half-inch offset or deflection, or the cracking, or the slope issues, you know, if, you know, they've got to meet those criteria for us to replace them. And if they don't meet the criteria, they're not going to be replaced. So, you know, certainly in areas that have just been reconstructed, you know, you would expect most of them to, you know, be acceptable, you know, not meeting the replacement criteria.
And as a side note, I believe staff has already walked the rehab area, and if you should have a green dot on any of the squares that he has preliminary identified. We'll walk it again in spring to do the final, but he's done a preliminary now to be able to get an estimate for next year.
So the green dot signifies,
A stone that is scheduled for rehab.
okay.
Councilmember Pansky had a question, so I
Yes,
thought it'd be good for the whole group.
I noticed on the new one that you handed out earlier that there's some work over there on Kohler and Westfield that is not on the original one here.
I'll take that one. I took the liberty of telling staff to put it on there because maybe it's wishful thinking, hopeful that it will be there. If we were to get an announcement before the CIP is approved, those would be amendments that we would offer into the CIP. So the idea was that it's there, and we wanted to let council know we were prepared to make those adjustments.
Did that bump down anything onto,
Not
into
at all.
another year?
No, nothing, which is a big swallow for the
There were some
engineering division.
alterations to some stormwater projects, but that's the only thing that was impacted. Reduced scope on one project, and another project will probably slide a little bit. But that's one that's been dependent on some cooperation with an industry in the area, so.
Would it
that's
make,
the only sliding,
okay,
sorry.
no, that's fine. Would it make any sense, as long as we're talking that area, the main route into the golf course was Pinoquo, and that was in pretty bad shape, and we had a patch put in there. Would it make any sense to make that a more concrete street, or more, is Pinoquo gonna gain more traffic than it would currently have now? If Oshkosh Corp builds, would it have a,
It would actually get significantly reduced, because all the traffic that currently goes to the golf course, any traffic going to their office complex would not be using Pinoquo, because
Okay.
Pinoquo does not connect to any of their driveways to their
Okay.
site access in the conceptual plans
okay.
that have been
Well,
put.
I guess we'll just keep that on the.
But we
out
still have
there.
the asphalt.
But we'll have the asphalt way over, which is good. But
Yeah,
I
there'll
know
be-
that there was
Still
some
needed.
issues with the road base wasn't very good, I remember, and some other things,
And we
so.
actually have we have, as part of the Mary Jewel lift station, we have to reconfigure all those sanitary sewers, so that's really what's driving those asphalt streets, is we're gonna be relaying all the sanitary sewer in there, more than
Okay.
likely destroying the asphalt surface that's on the top now.
Sure.
And we'll be, as a result, putting some good base in those
Okay.
trenches, so for a vast majority of those streets, they're gonna get pretty beat up, and we'll put a new surface with hopefully some, and I do anticipate doing some grading and graveling in there to beat
Okay.
up those bases, to
All right.
pave those.
Good.
The beauty of the maps that are the new maps that engineering provided you really give you a good overview of a lot of the CIP projects by category for 2018 and then 2019. I know Steve and his staff put together the 5-year CIP, but quite honestly, they really do a 10-year CIP. That's just, we visually show the 5-year CIP. 10 years a lot more fluid. Is that a good way to put it, Steve?
Yes.
But these guys are looking at a 10-year horizon when they're looking at streets, recognizing that everything's subject to change. We feel pretty good that the 2-year, Trina and her staff balance the CIP to the dollar on a 2-year budget cycle, which I think is very valuable. And we've literally talked about the fact that we really are in effect doing a 2-year budget when we talk about CIP, which is a very good practice. Keeps us on the ball in terms of getting the projects planned out well. And you'll see that most of the projects, if you took at last year's CIP and then take a look at this year's 2018, it matches up pretty well. Not perfectly, but it matches up pretty well. And then obviously something like the possibility Oshkosh Corp throws
Yeah.
things into a tizzy, but I'm very proud of the fact that we're tracking our 2-year CIP very, very well. But you can see the 18 and 19 projects are all there, and they coded them, with little trees for park projects, the TIF projects. So it gives you a good overview. You can see Oregon Street, Otter, and Washington Avenue and Court are the big project, or the big street project for next year.
Question with Washington. I know they're moving fairly quickly on the new Y. The old Eagles Club, there's a lot going on now. Are we gonna wait until both of those projects are done before we redo that portion of Washington?
At this point, we've put off Washington until the Y is expected to be complete. I'm not sure if they're 100% complete yet, but I know their original plan was this fall. So we've put, yes, actually, yes, you're right, Steve. Our original plan actually had Washington in 19. We moved it forward to 18 a year ago to try and, okay, once the Y's done, then we'll come in and get the street redone, because, you know, you certainly don't want two projects of that magnitude going on at the same time, because contractors would literally be tripping over each other trying to get deliveries in and out. So when we moved Washington into the 18 CIP last year, it was with the anticipation that the Y would be done. I'm not sure what the timing is on some of the work at Eagles Club. I haven't been and talked to Alan about that at all.
Alan, I'm not sure if you have anything, I mean, there's a lot of unofficial stuff. I know they're actively working on it, but
We've tentatively, through some of the site plan review preliminary stuff, they've been looking at roughly a July completion timeline.
So
They
would
could
it-
always,
But they can-
enter from Bone Street. I mean,
Right.
They're contractors.
yeah, they've, Broad Street.
Broad Street.
Roger.
Yeah, they've got that advantage that the Y didn't have as much.
And would that Washington Ave be one of those projects that we might start later in the season versus early in the season?
Well,
Because of that, maybe?
Well, with the amount of work, you know, Court, Otter, and Washington will all be one project. Certainly the storm sewer to feed the whole area's got to start at the south end of Court and work its way up. I think sanitary sewer's got to come up from CP as well. You know, so from a utility standpoint, it certainly would seem to make sense that the contractor's going to start, you know, down at Court and CP, or in the storm sewer case, just south of CP, and work their way north. You know, so depending on how they would want to schedule their crews, you know, it certainly seems that Washington will be the last of the streets that they would start. But, you know, until you have a contractor under contract and they start laying it out, it's hard to say.
We're
But,
gonna have to go underneath the tracks there?
no, we should not have to
But
go.
not included. Thank you for that question.
Well, I just thought I'd throw that out there since we've had
At-
some
at-
issues.
At both
Knock on wood.
at both Washington and Otter, we believe that we are not going to have a utility crossing. Certainly Washington, we should not, because, you know, as you may remember, we had an emergency situation a year or two ago where we had to actually replace both the water and the sanitary under the tracks already. So water and sanitary certainly do not need to, and storm doesn't cross the tracks, it heads south towards the river.
Okay.
And I believe Otter, we actually crossed the tracks with the water main a year or two ago when we were in Otter on the east side of the tracks. And sanitary sewer does not cross the tracks, it heads south to the Broad Street pump station. So at both of those, we do not foresee any utility crossings. Certainly paving may have to get near the tracks or into
Yeah.
the track zone, but that's certainly not a utility crossing, which is what's been our challenge this year, is a utility crossing.
All right.
So I think, I don't know, Mark, did you want me to kind of just try to start at the beginning and step through? I know we've kind of bounced around a little bit here to start.
I guess it's up to the pleasure of council. We want you to manage your 2 hours as best you can. The graphic presentation for 2018, this map, really gives you a good overview. If you'd like us to go through the individual projects, we can do that, or if you just want to, as you're scanning the map, there's not a lot of surprises from last year to this year. Our street projects are pretty well laid out.
One thing that might be a little different to you, I don't know if you noticed in the front of your books, added a little bit more background and history over where we've been on the street projects for the last 5 years, just to, you know, kind of give a little bit more of a background of where things are at as we continue to evaluate moving forward. You know, as I've had conversations with several of you over the last year, you know, that was, you know, kind of one of the things is trying to just refresh and remember some of that history. So you know, that's the reason we added that at the front of the book, is just to try to provide a little refresher on some of those street projects from the last 5 years is what we've included there.
I should quickly mention with the street project, at least on my street, you know, Bay Shore Drive, Lake, and also Eveline, I mean, I've had no complaints from any neighbors. Everyone has been happy with the progress, how the project went. The only complaint I had was a neighbor asked why I got darker dirt than he did in the terrace. And so it's been nothing but positive comments on the whole project. The major
It was
Major
It
undertaking.
was a big undertaking, and thank you. You know, we certainly will share that with our staff and our contractor as well. I know They've worked hard to try to have that level of communication with the neighborhood, which is very important, you know, especially in that neighborhood. We got a couple of dead-end streets off of some of those streets with Caniff and Carr, so, you know, it was certainly a challenge to try to make sure that residents could get in and out for some of those streets.
Now, when you did Bay Shore, did you redo sidewalks that needed to be repaired at that time as well?
Yep.
Now, why are we back in that area for 2019 sidewalk rehab?
Kind of the same question that Councilmember Palmieri had. We're not gonna do those sidewalks. That's why we think we might be able to do a larger area.
Okay.
Because there are so many streets that we've done in that
Yeah,
neighborhood
because
over the past.
that's quite a length.
Yeah,
there
we won't have to
That's in
re-
that area, okay.
And that's just the geographic area that we're going to inspect. We're only going to fix.
Got it.
Are there any, you know, the comprehensive streets, the other streets, stormwater utility, water, wastewater utility, and sidewalks are graphically well described on the maps? I would say that some of the public property and some of the utility plant improvements, they're just a dot. There may be some value in going through those. Do you want us to go through any of these infrastructure improvements? Or are we covering them pretty well going through the map? It's really up to you. It's whatever your pleasure is. I just want to budget your time as best we can tonight.
I guess I'd just like a little more detail on the East Parkway Detention Basin.
Sure.
Anything in particular, or just a little more description of what?
Yeah, a little
what we're-
more
That
description.
starts over on page 9. But
Page
actually,
10, actually.
Parkway's on page 10.
Yep.
Page 10 of this one
Oh,
or
the
big one?
CIP.
Big document.
The CIP book, sorry. What we're looking at doing there, we've been in discussion with the CN. There's they have some additional land in that area that is not used for track purposes. It's basically not utilized at all. And given the you know, the Parkway watershed and the restriction with the railroad and getting, you know, the stormwater to try to cross there, as we, you know, analyzed and modeled that watershed, we had a couple of options that we were really looking at, either doing significantly large, you know, kind of underground in-street storage, which would have been very problematic for other underground utilities that need to utilize that street, or, you know, we reached out to the CN and we've been working with their real estate staff on a portion of that unused property that we would look to acquire and then construct a dry detention basin similar to the one between Baldwin and New York on the west side of the railroad tracks.
And that
Can
one
you-
works very well, let me tell you.
Can you describe like what flooding in that area there's been?
Trying to remember that watershed model. I know Grand, in the area of Grand, Parkway maybe a little bit less so, but I know Grand has had issues. I don't remember all the streets in that.
Irving.
Dale?
I think a
Dale,
lot of it's actually not upstream, but downstream. This is catching the water from the upstream and detaining it, so we don't have as many issues east of the
Okay.
tracks as it's being pushed out. So not so much in this area, if I remember correctly, but it's actually trying to
North
alleviate some
of
of
that, so north of that.
East.
Oh, I'm
East.
sorry, east of that.
East of that, where there was some flooding near the lake, where we're getting a little closer to lake level.
So then, would you be going under the tracks on that and diverting? Because,
No, there's already a storm sewer crossing under the tracks from when
Okay.
we reconstructed Parkway. The intention here would be to get the detention basin constructed, and then in 19, if you look at the map for 19, Grand Street would be reconstructed.
gotcha.
So get the detention basin built, get the vegetation established, then the following year, get the storm sewer to put water into it so that the vegetation's well established, so you don't have erosion issues. That was one thing that actually worked well with the Baldwin project. We built it one year and got the storm sewer connected into it the next year so the vegetation could get established well.
I'm a little embarrassed. Was there a staff document or any kind of analysis or background information provided on this that I maybe came up earlier? Is there something out there that I can read a little more on that shows some of the need?
Yeah, let me, I know it was talked about when we were, the Parkway reconstruction came up, so let me look for something to, if we don't have something out there. There may be something on the utility webpage, but
James, does this budgeted amount here reflect the price, the possible purchase price to acquire this land, or is this just strictly construction?
There is money there for acquisition, as well as there was some, funding left available from the Parkway project as well. So, I believe, looking at this cost, that would include acquisition and, construction. We've got design.
I thought design and acquisition was in this year, actually.
I didn't bring my 17 book.
I didn't think to bring it either.
So
I
is
think
this
it
gonna be
was.
similar to what you, is the intent, like down in the arena area, to structurally kind of mimic that that's done up there? The obstacle that we're running into as far as with the railroad and,
I'm not quite sure I'm following you.
They're not going underneath the railroad there. It's gonna be if you go to New York and the railroad tracks, there's a dry detention pond there. That's gonna be the same type of thing that they're
Yeah, it's
putting in
the
there.
same
Same
design
size,
concept.
that way. It's gonna be parallel to the tracks, not going across the tracks this way. So think of it going north-south, not
Right.
east-west.
We're gonna intercept the water coming down Parkway, run it north on Grand Street, and then take it into that detention
Right.
basin. So then the detention basin will fill, and we'll be discharging that into the pipe that we put underneath the railroad tracks on Parkway before. So we'll be removing a small section of pipe to divert that water coming down Parkway, divert it into the detention basin, let that act as storage to slow the flow heading east, and it will then discharge and go back under.
well, that's why I'm a little confused, because if the water is heading east and causing flooding down Parkway, there's a hill there.
Yeah, but see, the
How-
east side of the tracks is lower than the west side of the tracks, so the water's running down to the east from the west.
Okay, all right.
The-
It's
the-
a
At least that's how it is on my side of the
a
street.
hydrology question that is probably beyond me. Just-
That's why that
There's
pond
too
was
much water
good
in
for
the
us.
There's too much water trying to get through the pipe
Right.
early, so we're trying to
Yep.
slow down the amount of water
Gotcha.
getting to the pipe, so it can clear out and then get more.
James, based on the 2017 CIP, the design was budgeted for this year's. I think we may have purchased this even pre-2017. We own the property, don't we?
No, not yet.
So that's gonna be part of the 500,000?
Yeah, initially, it was going down that road, and then, the Canadian National came back and said, well, we need to see your design plan before we'll, sign off on the acquisition. So that's why the design is progressing.
Okay. Any other projects that are on the list? We've talked,
Looks like we're doing quite a bit of, with that detention basin, quite a bit of, I see Furno watershed land, an outflow on Vine, so we're doing a lot of kind of like flood prevention, I guess you
Yeah,
could say.
the issue with the outfall on Vine, there was a partial storm sewer failure in that area, resulted in a sinkhole in a parking area that the university used to lease from Axle Tech. We went back and forth with Axle Tech. Streets Division determined that the storm sewer is open and flowing. We basically just put a Band-Aid over the top of the pipe where it failed, and then we filled it back in with gravel. So this would reconstruct that outfall and get it to a more appropriate size, as well as structurally sound. So yeah, that's a flood prevention and dealing with an issue with a failing infrastructure in that area. The Furno watershed land acquisition, that's one I mentioned earlier. We've been working cooperatively with a business up in that area that is looking to do some expansion, as well as work with us to be able to provide regional detention in that Furno watershed. So we're a little bit on their pace right now, which has been slower than initially anticipated.
I think it'd be appropriate to point out, because, we've identified a project's getting added with Oshkosh Corp. James, is the wetland mitigation bank one of the projects being deferred if this whole thing happens with Oshkosh
No.
Corp? Not the
No, that
wetland
was not
mitigation?
that was not one of the projects.
Okay.
What we were looking at there is reducing the scope of the Geldwin Stringham outfall, and just getting enough storm sewer to get past the Riverwalk and get the dredging done in the lagoon out there to open up the outfall. So that was reducing the scope of that project. And then partial reduction in Furno with, with the uncertainty of working with that particular business as far as when they might proceed. So the wetland mitigation was not one that was deferred as a part of the potential Oshkosh Corp project.
And is that the city of Neenah match as well in the wetland mitigation bank?
Yeah, the other is the city of Neenah match.
Oh, okay,
We
160.
still got a little bit there in that
Okay.
project. James, you mentioned that one outfall. Is that what we were talking about earlier?
The Stringham Jeldwin outfall?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one that, with that Riverwalk project, with the bids coming in so favorably, that Riverwalk is, proceeding, so, as we've looked at, that watershed, that outfall right now is a very old box culvert with two smaller pipes kind of strapped to the side of it, and they're all in very poor condition. So we needed to, at least try and get the downstream most part of that outfall repaired and get it consolidated so that, in the future, when things need to be done, we're set up and we don't have to dig up the Riverwalk and cross the Riverwalk.
Is that the one where you think you might want to try to piggyback it with the existing contract?
Yeah, that was one that we've been, considering that because the Riverwalk project did end up getting awarded much, a greater length than was originally anticipated. So there may be some significant benefits to trying to work with that contractor to get a portion of that outfall through the Riverwalk constructed as a part of that project, and also probably the dredging as well.
Yeah,
But those are not currently a part of their contract.
I know the council's sensitive to change orders, but not all change orders are bad. And this is an example of where we can take advantage of some good pricing. This project, the scope's gonna go down, but we still wanna get that part of it done. So you may find us coming back to council, early next year, James, to.
Yeah, I've got to evaluate, we gotta make sure the design is up to par, so I gotta go back and evaluate that, but it would, we would either probably be looking at December or early January. Just got a few things I gotta work out with timing with staff.
Because we don't wanna dig it up again a second time. We wanna take advantage of it when we can.
If the scope of the project changes, I mean, that's legitimate reason to do a change.
And with
order.
this project getting held back, we want that outfall to get done so that
Okay.
that'll be all covered.
Yeah, so we don't have to dig up the Riverwalk. That's, the last thing I wanna do is come through a year or two after the Riverwalk gets done and dig it up to put a new outfall in.
Sure.
I wanna get it done at the same time so we could pave over the Riverwalk once.
The only thing I would notate also for the council is this is a utility where you will see a decreased amount of investment. And this is in trying to step down those rate increases for our utility customers. So over the past few years, you've seen more significant work being done. However, this is part of the beginning to step down those projects and start to decrease some of those rate increases.
We are gonna go through some of the utility rate comparisons over the process.
Okay.
Are there any other projects, I think the utility, public property, well, both public property improvements don't get reflected well on the map here, and I wanna make sure we don't skip over those. But are there any questions regarding any of the in the street type of improvements?
When we do that inflow,
I&I?
I&I, do we kind of like start in a certain area of the city and work? Because I know like this year they were kind of on the North Main Street, kind of north, that area
I'll let-
quite a bit. And then I think they did some stuff off of Bowen Street in that area.
Yeah, we have,
I&I's on page 20, just for reference.
we completed a lot of the inspections through city staff and used a consultant on the north side for the manhole. So we were based on the allocation of funds, generally trying to keep it geographically together so that we weren't having a contractor running all around. We get better prices,
Sure.
we're not messing up as many areas of the city at one point in time. So we do work in a concentrated area for the manhole rehab. The sewer lining and some of the other projects that come along with that are more on a need basis around the city, where we determine that those are a good investment to work, the pavement's in good shape and we can work with those. Those tend to be less evasive and that we're not digging up nearly as much, if at all, with a simple sewer lining project.
And that's strictly a wastewater project then?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, but there's benefits over in the operating side of the wastewater budget with the success we've had, because yeah, this I&I doesn't do any good unless you get some benefit from it.
Right.
The real key is we're treating less clear water, so.
And that's, yeah, we've been working on trying to develop, a empirical or data-driven, support documentation. We just haven't had enough rainfall events, but what we're seeing, anecdotally from the wastewater operations staff is, during wet weather, when we get those 1.5 to 2.5 inch rainfall events, the flow meters at the plant used to peg at 100 million gallons or more. They're only seeing at this point, 50 to 60 million and coming down relatively quickly. So, anecdotally, they're seeing significant improvements in the amount of clear water that's coming to the plant. We're just working on trying to back that up with, okay, here's the rainfall data, here's what the ground conditions were, and here's what, the flow meter readings were. So, we've got a very small sampling size at this point. It's just, it's not enough that we felt, significantly comfortable, trying to lay it out. You say, okay, yeah, this is what, we're seeing, and we just, we're trying to gather a little more data to support what we're, anecdotally seeing at the plant. But, what the operations staff have told us is, they have seen significant decreases in the peaks during those rainfall events.
Okay, good. I was just kind of curious if it was like our sidewalk program where you just kind of keep rotating.
It will be. Ultimately, it will have to be, yes.
Oh, okay. All right, good.
Because unfortunately, even as we replace infrastructure, we're still only doing, maybe a couple miles a year in a system that's got 300+ miles of mains underground. So there will be times, stuff that was put in the ground 20 years ago, is going to start leaking at some point in time, and we're going to have to do something. So, this is not a program that we can, do for a few years and say, all right, we nailed it and be done, or we will.
Ongoing.
Yeah, we will see it fall back to where it was. So it's one of those things, we're seeing great improvements, but, for the foreseeable future, it's going to need to continue in order to maintain those improvements that we've seen.
Oh, yeah.
Before we get into I want to get into the public property improvements, but before we get out of that, with respect to sidewalks, James and I were talking about this today. The sidewalk program's on page 22, and most of it is special assessed, and we were just discussing that program, how we rotate through the city, we're trying to stay on a 10-year cycle. Most of the costs are actually assessed, but there's a portion of the city that's approved. A few years ago, the city actually lost a case, and it was kind of a bellwether case for the whole state, because it was not, I say a sidewalk, it was not a sidewalk, it was actually a driveway apron. And now as we are doing our sidewalks, we have to take a look at driveway aprons as well. It was determined that even though a driveway apron serves your property, it is in the public right-of-way.
I was gonna say, yeah.
And this court case ruled against the city, and we were the first in the state that got clobbered with this ruling. But it was, you are responsible, city, to maintain the safety of these
Driveway apron.
driveway aprons as much as you are sidewalks. Opened up a whole different world. So our sidewalk program is a sidewalk / driveway apron program.
And we explain that to our citizens, because, I think most of them think it's theirs, because that's their entrance to their driveway,
Well,
to
they'll
their
get
property.
assessed for it,
Right, but I mean, are they
it's
in
a
the letter of
right-of-way.
being explained, or the program, are we explaining to
The
them?
letter does state that we're inspecting sidewalks and drive aprons. And
Okay.
They are inspected on different criteria. We don't hold a driveway to the same criteria
Sure.
as a sidewalk. We're not really worried
Okay.
about the little spalling in a driveway versus for a car driving over it.
Sure.
Well, streets construction, we do
We'll do aprons.
the
Yeah, you do the
apron,
apron
so it's
anyway.
really our,
But this is like the streets that didn't get redone.
Right, and then,
We're
or
doing
even
it.
asphalt streets that are getting, new
Yep.
sidewalks, sure.
The
Okay.
reason I wanted to bring it up is because we're still feeling our way through driveway aprons, because we hadn't done them in the past. So those, we might see some change orders in there, because we're just getting our sea legs about how to do those and incorporate them into our sidewalk program. So you'll probably see a little more work in this year's program as a result of that, because as we went through, and I know they didn't do a lot, my neighborhood was on the list this year, there weren't a ton of aprons that got done.
Wouldn't expect it in your area, relatively newer area, all concrete aprons.
But the northeast.
But the
portion of
northeast side was
Oh,
also
yeah,
done.
yeah.
And that neighborhood, there were a lot of aprons that we didn't expect to get done, so that's kind of surprised us.
We actually had, it was surprising, while a number of people had an apron that wouldn't necessarily require to be done, we had a lot of people come out and request them to be done. And as part of the program, we did them at their request, so that added a substantial amount of work to the project as well.
So you'll be seeing that, but those get all collected back through special assessments, and it certainly we want to accommodate the residents on that. But I wanted to take an opportunity to just mention that one as well, because it's kind of a new thing with the aprons. If you don't have any questions about the map, the projects on the maps, it may be appropriate to get into the public property improvements, because there's quite a bit. I mean, these are things that are behind the fence at the treatment plant and things like that. Also, some non-utility that are public works related. I can't remember. Do you have any of those? Are any of these yours? Are you off the hook on those?
Nope, non-utility, there's a couple there, would be, Enos Paulus project, as well as, finishing up some landscaping over at, field operations.
Go ahead and ask. That's a good one. Page 31.
Used to be at $500,000, now we're up to $600,000? And an increase over, can I use this, 17? Right?
Yeah, go ahead. We had that meeting with the council about, and we met with the residents out
Yep.
there about the
Yep.
Enos Paulus quarry, and the scope of that
Yeah,
project
it
is.
was at 500,000.
Is that in the 17 or the 18?
That was 17. Oh, take a look. Oh, I thought you were going to 18, because 18's in here
Just
too.
getting there.
Oh, I thought you were, I'm sorry, no, go ahead. You're doing well.
I don't
Well,
remember
but
if it wasn't
I think
in,
what Caroline is wondering is, this is a multi-year project.
Right,
So
what's-
initially, the 500,000 was in 17.
the 500,000 budget for 17
is
was
in
for land
addition to
acquisition and
that.
getting design work done. The 600,000 was starting construction.
You recall that we also reached a settlement with the Keenest estate to get some funds to contribute
I
towards.
don't think the
200,000.
project
About
actually
200.
showed up in the 18 version of the 17 CIP, Caroline.
That could be it.
Okay.
Because I don't think we had enough information to put a construction estimate together in 17 when that plan was put together.
How many years is this project anticipated to be, James?
We've
Is it
got-
more than a two-phase?
No, just the 2 years is all that it's in there for. At that point in time, the system construction will be complete, and then it would move into the operation and maintenance side, which is funded in the operating budget, similar to the operation and maintenance at Quarry Park, Knapp Street across the street from Quarry Park, and Timmerman down on 35th.
Now, those projects, James, like the Keenest Quarry and those, there's no grants or anything that we can get from the state. That's all kind of falls on us because they were old landfills of ours. and
Not
things.
that I'm aware of.
Nothing through the DNR or anything
Yeah,
like that?
Not that I'm aware of, but I can
Okay.
try and do some more research on it, but I have not come across anything.
I'm just curious
so
if there was
far.
any, environmental help out there in some capacity for something like that, where it's an old landfill versus just a quarry.
Now, we've fished around for those.
Okay, well, if we have,
Yeah.
I think one challenge is because we created the
Right.
contamination. There are a lot of brownfield grants for parties that were coming in to clean up contamination. But in the case of where we were there's probably more proper
The responsible
terminology,
party.
but
The
the responsible party,
Okay.
it's much more difficult to obtain.
Any
funding
kind of
for that.
environmental grants or anything like that, okay.
I still think the owner of the quarry should have been held responsible.
Well, he gave the land to the city though, didn't he? Or wasn't it like that? I mean, he owned the land, but he let us dump there or something?
He let us, he allowed us to dump there, and once we became a party to that,
Then where is much, a
we argued that he had
little more liability?
more liability because he accepted more. It was not exclusive municipal waste dump. He allowed us to put things there, but he also put things there, and that's
Yeah.
how we were able to get money from the estate. So there's that one, and that's a continuation of that project. And then there's also the biofilter over at the Public Works Field facility.
Sorry, Lori, you had a question?
Yeah, page 29. So this is another non-utility public property improvement on the roofing HVAC. Can you remind me where we were doing this, or where the recommendations were, which buildings?
I'm gonna have to rely on you for that, Mark, because that
Yeah,
comes to
that's,
purchasing.
that was discussed during,
Right, we had,
Public,
yeah.
or not Public Works, Administrative Services.
But can you just remind me where that was?
Which,
Priorities?
The HVAC improvement.
John Urban does an evaluation with every department, goes through every building, and they have an assessment that's done with an engineering firm to assess both HVAC as well as roof projects. So we have a list, and we basically reprioritize it every year, and
Can you
most,
tell me what those priorities are?
no, I'm trying to,
No, okay.
yeah.
All right.
John, could you maybe get John Urban to?
No, that's
Give a
okay.
little update.
Just follow up.
Yeah, just follow up.
The one thing I would offer of that, if you remember, we just recently did the Park and Recreation Building, that major rehab on their HVAC. This was a funding source in 17. This is funded annually, and really, so we start with the goal projects, but this is also how we address any emergency or unknown, and then start bumping down as needed when items that weren't anticipated come up. But this was a funding source for that, the parked building, for those much-needed safety HVAC improvements that were completed this year.
I thought there was something at the convention center that was gonna need to be replaced. Something in the HVAC. If I remember, but,
Yes,
Yes.
but that was, with that one, I felt it was appropriate that the room tax.
Oh,
pay for that.
okay.
So
That's a
that
different-
was-
that's a different
That comes
budget.
out of that 1.5 million that the council authorized that borrowing for.
Okay.
We just felt that that was the right
Okay.
place to do it.
All right.
Because we had done a couple of those in the past, and then.
Right.
I think it was recognition that, we shouldn't, those funding sources, no different than over at the treatment plant. If Steve has an issue about a roof project, Steve's budget pays
you
for
got
that.
500 in the, transportation for parking lot improvements. We have any identified parking lot improvements?
Same thing, Jim prioritizes all those, basically does effectively a Paiser rating for the
Right.
parking lots, just like.
The ones I believe he's targeting right now are the State Street lot, the portion that the city retains, and the Otter Avenue lot. Those are two that he has talked to us to see if we have any staffing availability to try to help him with those projects.
Okay.
It's very tight. I'm not sure if we will or not, but, those are the ones that Jim's indicated that, for sure he wants to try to get to next year.
And there's been some, I know we had discussion at one of the workshops about that gravel parking lot off of Oregon Street.
10th
that
and
may-
Oregon.
may
Trina
need
wrote
to-
down the notes from the meeting.
May
so
need to be looked at.
We're gonna
because of the
evaluate that.
Arena.
I think the arena's really gonna drive that one. We'll see.
Now, when we do our parking lots like that, then that follows all our codes and everything, and we have to have the islands, we have to have the
Yep,
storm sewer.
Yep, it
all
goes
the-
through all the same site plan review process as any development does.
Just
Okay.
like you see out here in this parking
Yeah.
lot, all the
Right.
biofilters and
Okay.
stuff like that. So those are the non-utility public property improvements. The utility public property improvements, those are all brand new for you tonight. So that begins on page 34. And the big one, obviously, is the clear well replacement, and I'm gonna let Steve, Steve, look at that, snuck right in there.
Steve and Steve show.
traded.
The three
Yes,
Steves right here.
Steve's still here. Obviously, the clear water, or the clear well is a big issue, and I know the council's had questions about that, Steve. I'm not sure if you want to just give maybe a brief overview. For $10 million, I think,
Well, and it's a public project. Right now, because of the things that we're doing and looking at, I think the total project is gonna be in the neighborhood of 20 million because we have funding in multi-years for this. The primary project is driven by the age of the clear wells, which most people don't realize out front. I wish you had a storyboard. Out front where that green space is, it is. they're
Looks like a
actually-
big hill, but it's not.
Yeah, there's about 2.2 million gallons of storage underneath there of treated drinking water that gets pumped out into the system. And those are, we think one of those is well over 100 years old. We know one certainly is 100 years old and the other one is slightly less than that. When those were designed, there wasn't any requirement for separation between groundwater and water storage. So those are actually in groundwater by the lake. So the new code, and this was identified as noted in our 2007 sanitary survey, that it's no longer allowable in code to have treated water storage below groundwater. There needs to be a 2-foot separation. So that project is essentially what we're gonna have to do is build structures on top of that. And in order to do that, we have to do what's called intermediate pumping, because right now we can run through the plant hydraulically and not have to pump it until we pump it out into the distribution system. Because these are being elevated, we're gonna have to pump out of one of the treated water basins into these tanks, and then from those tanks, we have to pump it again into the distribution system. And in a couple of our distribution system pumping stations, the 1985 one particularly, the areas where we pump from are also below groundwater. So we're addressing that issue in those pumping stations also. So we'll have two tanks, about 1 million gallons each, and we're actually using those structures to actually support those tanks. And so we're actually able to use the space that's there. So we're gonna use the sidewalls of those to help support it. So we're actually using the existing structures to help us reduce some of our costs. We're going with pre-stressed concrete tanks because they are low cost and there's less leakage than like a poured concrete tank. And it's gonna be an extremely challenging project for us to continue to operate the plant and make those changes in configuration. We've spent over a year during design just talking about how we're gonna run this place, how are we gonna do this, what
Are we gonna experience some disruption in water service?
Should not. And we're gonna be kind of challenged because we're gonna be running on a very thin margin while we're doing that. We understand that, but there should not be any disruption.
We shouldn't have any issues with water quality or quality?
No,
or any of
no,
that?
the treatment process will be the same. It's really essentially getting the water out into the distribution system that's gonna be a little more challenging.
So
So we're gonna have to build one of those tanks and then get all the high lift pumping in place before we can build the other tank.
That's just drinking water, right? That doesn't affect like our fire hydrants for fire department?
Well,
and
yeah,
fire
yeah, that's
workers?
all connected to this too.
So could we have an issue with them if we had a major fire?
Well, that's what our water towers are for.
Okay,
So we're gonna be a little more challenged getting water to those towers,
okay.
but we've come up with a plan to be able to do that. So, we understand it's gonna be a little more challenging for us, but we're making sure that we've got, enough cushion there so that we should be able to get what we need out to the system.
Worst
And
case,
that's-
we put some pumps in the river and start pumping.
But that's why it becomes a 2.5 to 3 year construction project. If this was greenfield where, we could build this without having it impact the operation of the existing facility, it could probably be completed in about 1.5 years. So by by needing to keep the facility fully operational while we're taking out half of this storage and building new, and, it really doubles the length of the project because you've got to do it in 2 phases to keep the system operating, to keep water going out into the system, because as you pointed out, it's not just drinking water, it is fire protection. And we need to be able to continue to provide, that amount of water that, the fire department needs if, the case should unfortunately arise.
The other
So-
big piece of this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you just said, James said this is a 2.5 to 3 year project, but in our materials, it says the WDNR is requiring this work to be done by 2019.
Well, they really want us to get construction started. If we go beyond that, if once we're under construction, they'll be
We met their-
satisfied
yeah.
with that. They've already approved the design, so DNR already understands where we are with their timing. They've actually attended some of our meetings, their design staff out of Madison. Our consultant, Linda Moore from CH2M, is
Sure.
working closer with them, so we're okay with the DNR side of it.
We're not looking at any fines from them
No,
because
no,
of
no,
our-
this
okay.
is
Okay.
considered a,
They've been very good to work with
Yeah.
throughout this, and Steve mentioned their staff come up from Madison. we've, at, a 30%, a 60%, a 90% in the final design, their staff from Madison came up and met with us. Our consultant sent them the conceptual plans a couple weeks ahead of time. They came up to the water plant and sat down with us and said, okay, these are some things we see that you need to work on. So they've been very engaged throughout the entire design process.
Generally, if they know if we're working diligently towards it, it's, we're okay. PSC though, PSC is gonna be giving you trouble.
Yeah, a couple other little background things here is that, and I've worked with the DNR approval, the engineer out of Madison for close to 30 years, so I have a long history. He's been great to work with on many projects in many communities. One of the reasons we're doing it now instead of jumping on it right away in 2007, I was trying to delay this project so that we could retire some of the bonds that we had for the construction of the water filtration plant. I'm trying to retire old bonds whenever possible before we do other bonding for the plant. So we're certainly not gonna be able to meet that criteria, but I think we're gonna be in the $8 or $9 million range of bond retirements in the next 2 years for stuff that was done on the water plant. And that was, again, 20 years. It was put online in 19 and 2019 will be 20 years old. The other piece of this that drives the cost up is that we've had to change the electrical load for that facility significantly because we're adding all this additional pumping, intermediate pumping and things. So we had planned on going back and looking at replacement of our emergency generators because of the age and design and things and some of the challenges we have. So we've rolled that up into this project.
So jumping ahead 2 pages, you see the water filtration plant, the emergency generator and switch gear under major equipment. That is all being constructed and has been designed as a part of the Clearwell project.
That'll be rolled into this project.
As part of the 10 million or
No,
over and
it's-
above?
In addition.
As Steve
addition to-
mentioned earlier, the total project cost, construction and construction engineering is going to be in the neighborhood of 20 million. So,
Okay.
If you look at the book over the course of 18, 19, and maybe even 20, that's where you add up all those numbers from those years, you get to that amount.
So that's really all of this, then the aerobatic digester, the influent gate valve, that's all part, no?
That's all wastewater, that's wastewater.
Oh, that's a
Yeah,
whole different,
the next 3 lines down are all at the wastewater.
okay,
plant.
that's a different project then, okay.
So as the city manager was alluding to, and we're planning on using safe drinking water loan program for all of this. So we get a cut in the interest rate. It's a good program. We've applied for it, intent to apply is out there. And so we're hoping we can get that worked out.
And the way that program works is, we pay the contractor, the DNR reimburses us, and, we don't make any repayments until the project is complete and closed out, and then the repayment cycle starts on that loan.
Do we, so the, so again, that loan, well, hopefully we'll be able to use that loan and we will get the benefit of that program. Again, as the city manager was alluding to, the stumbling block for this project has not been DNR, it's been a change in the process used for approving construction projects by the Public Service Commission. So we got to a 90% review process. We presented that to the Public Service Commission. They took issue with some of our design capacity, some of the design capacity assumptions that we used. So to make a long story short,
We're working through it with
We're
them.
working through that with the Public Service Commission right now. We had
Hopefully,
hoped,
we're hoping it's not gonna delay it, but
yeah, we had hoped to be ready to bid this and so held off on that. So we'll be working through that process and let everybody know how that goes. But again, they have kind of changed their philosophy on this stuff and using different criteria that we've never seen used before in determinations for these projects. So we'll continue to work through that with the PSC and try and get that resolved.
think of dueling bureaucracies and we're in the crossfire, so You're 90% there, and then take a
As,
couple steps back.
as we mentioned, DNR was very involved throughout the design process. Public Service Commission was invited to each one of those meetings as well and
They
chose
didn't want
not to
see
be
it till
involved, so.
90%.
But we'll work through the process and, you know, hopefully it's not as painful as the process we're working through with the railroad. Yes, Lori?
So then on, also on page 34, where we're looking at the digester roof replacement,
Yep,
I have a question. What type of roof is that right now?
it's a membrane.
Okay, so is it a flat roof or is it pitched?
You know, the digester building, I think that's a flat roof. I think that's
Oh.
a flat membrane roof,
Okay,
which is pretty typical on our buildings.
okay, all right. I was just curious at looking at some of the different roof projects, if we're looking at any kind of
Yeah, and
potential metal.
we use,
thing.
sometimes we use the same folks to evaluate our roofs. We also have a really good roofing contractor that comes in and helps us out with repairs and gives us information on where we need to be. But again, I believe that's a 96 or 98,
Yeah, if you flip back, Steve.
Yeah, you got 96 in
Right there.
96.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we got
was when that complex was designed, so that'll be the first replacement on that. And we'll have some other ones for some of the other buildings coming up in future years too.
If there's no other questions on public property, the next one would be the major equipment. It begins on page 37. There's a variety of items there. We went through general services and fire and community development, but it's the water distribution, water filtration, and wastewater with that equipment. And then vehicles are on the following page. But Steve, you want to get into some of the projects there?
Well, it's been 10 years since we did our completed, we completed our meter changeout program recently, and that is done in a 10-year cycle. So in 2018, we are going to move into our 10-year changeout again.
And this is something we're working with the Public Service Commission to try to extend that time frame. At this point, they've not been receptive to that as well, but we will continue to try to extend that replacement cycle. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I got that
Yes,
information
no,
out there,
yeah,
Steve.
we're hoping that at some point in time, we're going to get them to, because the meters and transmitters that we're putting in are 20-year design life. There's no moving parts in these new meters, they're slightly more expensive, but they're extremely reliable, and they really do a nice job. The things we used to have with the mechanical meters, like they'd get gravel in them during construction, or someone repaired a service or something like that, we'd end up with stop meters and things like that, and that'll essentially go away with these new meters, the way they're set up.
On this page as well, 37, not for you guys, just a question, probably Trina, the contingent capital is under the administration department in the amount of $300,000.
Yes, so that's a very good question. What that is that's what we've been trying to start to build into our annual CIP planning. And this is for money that is not currently what I would call assigned, but when we have an emergency or we have a development that we were not anticipating, creating a funding source for the council to assign and having available borrowing if needed. So this is what I would call a holding spot for something that is not anticipated or that was not expected or that comes unknown. It gives us a funding source. We do not borrow it if it does not get assigned, but it's creating that holding spot in lieu of some of that TIF 7. It's one of our contingency plans to the TIF 7 closure, having that available borrowing capacity if needed.
So we don't, we have an $11.4 million borrowing cap. That's part of the 11.4, so we're not spending that. However, we're likely going to be using it up. This is where some of the funding sources that the council approved for the Oshkosh Corp. That was going to take us back up to our borrowing limit.
Right.
This is part of it.
Well, it just makes sense to put some money aside in case
Yeah.
of emergencies.
Unfortunately, it's 2 months before the year starts, but that was the idea, and it's actually you know, we're gonna do it again the
Will that
following.
be exhausted for that?
Yes, it will. It'll get us up to our 11.4 cap.
No, I mean, the 300, will all of the 300,000 go to that? If that, and if it, for some reason, does not happen, then,
And that's our
Okay.
contingency, certain, you know, we won't borrow for it in June if we don't need it.
Okay.
And that's usually what we do. If we don't need it, we don't borrow for it.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Any other,
Steve, you got 2.2 million, 2.3 million, if you want to just briefly talk about
well, we
those.
touched on the switchgear already.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Tied to the filtration, or the Clearwell project, so if you wanna get into the
Yeah,
digester
um,
mixing.
Our anaerobic digester mixing, again, that's a 1996 vintage. We want to upgrade our technology and improve on it, and so we're working on a design that was funded last year, and we anticipate that project going. That's our anaerobic digesters, that's the treatment of the solids that come out of the treatment process. Further treatment process that conditions that material so that it can be dewatered, and actually that's land applied as biosolids through a DNR program, so.
so the mixing upgrade is actually like a repair, or it's adding on to an existing piece of equipment, or does it actually get replaced?
It's actually be replaced. We have what's called a gas mixing system that we're using now, and those are, it's an outdated technology, those aren't being done anymore. And we're looking at two different other technologies. One is called draft tubes, and the other is mechanical or vortex mixing. And so we have a CH2M, which has staff that have expertise in these areas that'll be working with us to decide what the best is on.
So the reason I'm asking is I'm just wondering, when we replace outdated equipment, what happens to it? Do we recycle it? Does it get,
It's usually scrap by the time we take it out. And most of the time, if there's a minimal value, we let it go back to the contractor. There, it's much easier for them to remove
to
it.
dispose of?
To
and-
dispose
yeah.
of, yeah, you know. I mean, we were-
If there is
we had
any
these-
reuse ability with any of them, those contractors have the contacts to be able to do that. You know, so by the time they bid the project, if they're thinking they can reuse it, they've already, you know, kind of got some, you know, preliminary deals worked out, and that gets reflected in the bid price then.
Okay, that's what I was kind of wondering, if we got any kind of
there's
like
any
recycle
value
rebate or
that they can
anything.
include in there,
Okay.
they certainly will.
Okay.
But if it's things that we can reuse, like the pumps from the,
Mm-hmm.
when Snell West was built and we decommissioned Snell, or even with the Murdoch station, we go through all that equipment, anything we can use, the controls or pumps or anything like that.
So we've got a little
Well-
salvage hoard somewhere?
Well, if we can reuse it, we haven't stored at the plant and it's backup for other systems.
Sure.
We have a generator that we can't necessarily reuse, but we pulled it out, and we're trying to find someone that's willing to purchase that. So we do,
So it's
there's
probably like an
value.
Osh buy if it's got any kind of market value or something.
or we talk to other folks. that-
KFC bucket.
Government site.
Yeah,
the
well, I
last
think, you know,
slide.
like with the generators and things like that, there's some very specific places, and, you know, we've talked to some of our suppliers, and they said, you know what, if you're trying to get rid of something like that, you know, here's 2 or 3 places that, you know, you wanna contact. I think we had one piece of equipment, I think it was the generator, wasn't it, that they use, like, all the time down on the oil rigs in the Gulf?
Oh,
And so
yeah,
we
that
had
was
somebody
Broad
that,
Street.
you know, so that was a case where it was, you know, somebody that supplies that equipment was like, yeah, you know, I'll, you know,
I think
I
they
can.
gave us $20,000 for that piece of equipment.
So you said that reflects on
Well,
our
it comes
invoice,
back- it
like
comes
as a
back-
credit?
Well, it comes back to us. In other words,
Okay.
we sold it outright. The thing is, that was originally manufactured in Waukesha, and these things were all over the place. Well, pretty soon, they stopped using those types of turbine generators, but they're great for the oil rigs in the Gulf. The only person we could get to come up and do maintenance on ours was from Louisiana, so we had to bring him up to do the maintenance work. And then it was like, okay, I think it's time to replace that. So that was a project a couple of years we did with the Broad Street lift station to upgrade that. But he said, I'll give you this for it, I can take care of the problems with it, and I can resell it. And it was like, if I can get $20,000 toward that $80,000 or $90,000 other piece.
Right.
Very good.
Gotcha.
So,
Okay.
In the interest of time, unless you have any questions, there is some major equipment on page 38. You know, of the 2.3, council's maybe gone through roughly 40% of it. The balance is public works. So any department that's stormwater, utility, streets, water distribution, or wastewater, that's under James's world. We got some street sweepers, water pumps, as well as snowplow trucks and things like that. Want to make sure council's aware of all those.
Basically, it's replacing outdated and older.
Every one of these is
Yeah.
well past its, there are items, quite honestly, that could be on this list that get left on the cutting room floor because we.
The street sweeper, that's a quieter one, right?
One of them, yeah.
Okay.
They're replacing two of them, so, yeah, one of the noisy ones.
Yeah, one
As
of
long
those.
as he doesn't back up in your neighborhood,
Yep,
they're all
we're
quiet.
good, we're good.
Even at
Gentlemen.
4 in the morning.
The one thing I would notate for the council is, the one item that is part of this discussion and our evaluation is they do bring a detailed maintenance record. And we're looking at not only what the current maintenance repair costs are, or actually, additional investments that we've made in equipment to make sure we're getting a return on those, repairs, replacements also. So it's a very detailed discussion with the departments when we are analyzing equipment to make sure that we have fully extended any useful life and we've received full return on any investment for repair or maintenance.
Kind of a rule of thumb that I use is I take a look at what the useful life of it is. And if we're spending more on annual maintenance than we would on if it's a 10-year payback, if we're spending more than 10% of the cost, it's generally about time to get that piece of equipment replaced. And I can assure you that Travis does an outstanding job of keeping those records.
He keeps very detailed records on all the maintenance on all of our equipment.
And this is where we did a change a few years ago. We don't borrow for this money?
We've borrowed for shorter terms on this equipment.
Okay.
We've gone from 20 to 10 years on this stuff, which is one of the things we talked about earlier, why our borrowing costs have gone up, because we're borrowing at 10-year terms rather than 20-year
20.
terms. And that's just a good
But
financial
the life
practice.
expectancies are not more than 10 years probably.
They're like
anyway.
10 to 20 years as opposed to, and we were borrowing 20 years for 10 to 20. It's like we should have been borrowing at 10 years all along. In no case do any of these pieces of equipment that are borrowed for less than 10 years. If they are, we pay cash for those. Good example are the recycling trucks.
Yep.
We can't get 10 years out of them. We try, but between glass and
Garbage and recycling both are that way.
things are breaking in there. That's the whole purpose. So we pay cash for those, and that's part of the recycling fund.
Okay.
Trina, on 38 as well, the project contingency / diesel bus, is that two separate things, or is that contingency just in there if, I know we approved yesterday the writing of the grants for the buses. Is that just in case we don't get that, or what's the?
If we don't get the grants, it's contingency.
It's the, also the city contribution. So when we do write those grants, we do have a city contribution.
That's the 90, right?
And that's just the 90?
Correct.
Correct.
So if we get an 80, usually it's 80-20,
Okay.
so that's our 20%. If we,
Yeah.
if we get it, then we contribute it to that. Otherwise, we use it for contingency.
Okay.
We've done that with a few things. There was something the chief fire department, the SCBA units, we
So
did not get the grant,
That can go
so
anywhere in the CIP, it does not have to stay then in Go Transit, for example?
correct. So
Okay.
for example, we'll probably know by mid-year, by the time we do the borrowing, so we'll know, do we need to borrow it for it or not? And if we get the grant, we'll borrow for it. If we don't, then it's in contingency, and then Trina can take a look at projects if anything goes awry. She's got another, so we try to build these in there, and this one was similar to the SCBA contingency this year. Unfortunately, at the last minute, we didn't get the grant, but we still had the money, and that was a good thing.
Okay.
So there are equipment purchases, that kind of covers Public Works CIP, but I know Trina wanted to to get into utility rate issues and talk about that a little bit. Is that you?
We did cover it in our previous workshop. If the council has any questions in regards to the rates, but we did cover that in detail in our Public Works operations budget presentations.
I do have a follow-up question on our water. So, some questions came up Monday evening. I was speaking with Winnebago Apartment Association, and there were some folks that were mentioning that currently, well, number one, asking the question about why a water bill can't follow an individual as opposed to it currently, that there was a disincentive. The claim is that there's a disincentive to the city actually having that bill follow the person, a tenant, for example, as opposed to going to the tax bill of that. Because then there's some interest and things like that. And I guess if you could just maybe talk about that for a second, because it's a relevant question.
Oh, it's on their minds.
Yep.
It has been since the day I was on council. They've whined about it, and whined about it, and whined about it, and whined some
Well,
more.
and I couldn't answer the question as
No,
to
that-
why, like, public service bills, the water doesn't follow the individual who used it as opposed to property.
So municipal utilities are the only utilities that have the right to do the tax roll process. And the reason for that is for example, Alliant Energy, WPS, they have built in their returns write-offs. That's not something municipal utilities have. And so the goal of the tax roll process is that the utility, to remain sustainable, does need to collect those utility bills. There are many options, there are many notices provided to landlords to try to mitigate those charges rolling onto their tax bills. But if they would like to contact us, those are good discussions to be having with the landlords about possible mitigations, but it's very important for the financial solvency of the utility that process is maintained.
Otherwise, we might be looking at not having it as a public utility, correct?
It would create some financial challenges.
But right now, the uncollected goes, or those water bills that don't get collected or paid through that process, we have that combined with the uncollected ambulance. Is that correct?
They do stay separated from the uncollectible because they're enterprise funds, so their write-offs need to stay separate from the ambulance write-offs. But the one thing that I would encourage the landlords to continue to evaluate and utilize is a new change that was granted through the Public Service Commission, which now allows landlords to issue liens against tenants that leave unpaid balances and pursue cash, pursue assets. That is something that our utility currently works with all landlords. We've met with that group and did promote that, and we'd be happy to go back and talk with them about that. But as long as they are completing the paperwork on the front end, they do have many ways to recover those dollars that are being tax rolled. Any person that is ran or goes through that process, they actually go on CCAP for an unpaid utility bill. So that is a new program. It's in its second year of infancy, but a huge advantage for the landlords. And I think that we can go back and talk with that group, but it is in practice, and we are currently utilizing that for unpaid utility bills that are transferring over to the county. And so there are other processes.
And
Thank you.
unpaid utilities can be a significant dollar value.
Huge.
Do you know if we're 10, 15% at certain times? I mean, it can be, there's some communities that it's 20% of their utility bills go on tax roll. So for us not being able to collect that revenue in order to continue to operate, that's a significant amount
So
of
10 to
dollars.
15% is our average.
I think we're probably in the 10 to 15% range. I'm just guessing, but that's pretty typical. And I know some utilities, they're up in the 20% range.
Meanwhile,
They can
listen-
go on, they can check every day of the week to see what has and has not been paid. And there are some of them that do it religiously and others don't do it. So all the tools are there for them to,
And we've been making that argument at the state level because they've been trying to get that change at the state level to prevent us from being able to use the property tax bill. So it's an ongoing struggle that
But
we have with those.
we also are pursuing the monthly, as ERP or Munis coalesces sometime in the next year, right?
My understanding is that the landlords are always notified along with the tenants. And so the landlord should always know if their tenant's delinquent.
they can check daily.
And they can check it, so they can call at any time. So there are mechanisms for them to find out where they are, and then they need to work with their tenant.
There was a question too by a tenant about being able to pay in other means besides check. But they are able to pay that online, aren't they?
Yes, so there's several means for utility payments. We do accept check, cash, and we do accept credit card. We use a third party to administer our credit cards, but utility customers are able to pay their utility bill via phone or via internet and make full payment on their utility bills.
Trina, credit cards are only accepted online, correct?
Or by phone.
Okay.
They have to use
Not
the
in
third party
person,
administrator,
but not in person
but
at the
not in
counter.
person, correct.
Sorry for that interjection, public service announcement, but inquiring minds have been asking.
Let's get back to the budget. We're running out of
Well,
time.
that is part of it.
I think Trina wanted to talk about just an overview because as we get into the home stretch, not sure how much time you want to spend on getting into some of the budget options, but the purpose of this evening was also to get into reviewing some of the options that council has presented and try to get through that. But Trina had put some information together. Trina, maybe you want to walk them through some of the thought process that you had in terms of just general overview, to kind of refresh your memories with what's going on with the budget process.
So if you turn to page 1 of your document, what we've kind of given you is the overall goal and the major milestones of the budget process. Where we're currently at it is about stage 3. Stage 4 continues into the next year. But we've really focused this year on ensuring that our capital and our operation budgets have alignment with our strategic plan. And I think this year of one particular accomplishment, I think we did a real good job in our workshops in meeting with the departments and doing it, that connection process of how our budget translates into or from our strategic plan. So then I would turn you to page 2. Again, what we want to be thinking about when we are planning and working through our budget. We talk about every year is this the most challenging budget? But the challenges seem to continue and they seem to grow. Several items that impact that. Some of them are funding opportunities. Some of them are local regulations, population growth, department initiatives. So what we're trying to do overall is connect that strategic plan. And in workshop number 1, if you can remember, we did roll out that 5-year model, which what we look at is where do our revenue and expenses look over the next 5 year, and how big is that gap between meeting a balanced budget. And definitely the next 5 years look very challenging, but these are some of the items that influence and impact that challenge. So then I would move you on to page 3, talking about in more detail some of the challenges facing our city. I think we also did a real good job talking about this in our operation budget presentations. We're starting to see less impact, but still some of that economic recession from 2008. State budget challenges, the one thing we talked about when we did our revenues, we are seeing some minor increases in funding from the state, but they have by no means restored that big cut from shared revenue. And without that restoration, the city will continue to rely on property tax levy as one of their primary funding sources. Another very large challenge in our community is our changing demographics of the population. It's something that we see in our ambulance, and as we evaluate our revenue stream and how do our demographics impact that revenue stream coming in to support that service. Again, something that has been talked about since I got here, aging infrastructure. We know we're still playing catch up and we still have a long way to go. When we look at our PACER ratings and we look at our miles that we need to replace per year, we're still not meeting that benchmark. And so as we continue in this challenge, it's going to continue to impact not just our operations budget, but also our capital budget. And lastly, healthcare costs. This was something that was a huge win for the city. That 4.6% reduction in healthcare costs this year. Again, most importantly to remember, that was a one-year fix. I don't anticipate that coming back around again, and next year is going to have some impact, or there's going to be impact from that reduction that we received this year. So then I would move you into page 4, long-range budget challenges, something that we've talked about in every workshop, and I think that the council is engaged and understands where we're at and where our challenges are. Increasing financial constraints. How do we continue to fund budgets that are primarily 75% or more personnel costs? We've got the growing skills gap. We're replacing a lot of very long tenured, experienced people. And how do we continue and how do we capture some of that experience and that education that they're leaving us with? Increasing stakeholder and performance expectations as we continue to grow and we try to gain more economic development. What expectations are there on the city to finance infrastructure, to provide incentives for new economic growth in the city? And lastly, aging infrastructure. We already talked about it, but huge. So long-range budget planning, as we begin to think about adopting this budget, what gets us beyond just this budget? Because as we talked about some of our challenges, those are the challenges that we've talked about since I've came to the city of Oshkosh. Really, it's starting to think more long-range and how do the decisions we're making on November 28th impact our budget going forward? How do we solve the problems, meet challenges, capture opportunities, and sustain essential services? That is a discussion that we started having this year, is looking at services and our current service protocols, and do we look at modification of those? Those will be continued discussions and things that we want to be thinking about, not just this budget, but how the decisions on November 28th impact those future year budgets. And again, the strategic planning connection. As the council and department heads and staff set that strategic plan, how do we create that alignment? Because it is very important that we're funding the priorities that we've set in developing our policy around. How do we ensure that our operations budget as well as our capital budget support that major footprint in the city? Yep, and so then I would flip you to page 10. This is the sheet that is designed for a tool. It's what I would call best practice. When you're looking at how do you propose a budget amendment, you know, how do you look and evaluate what is that long-term, what is that future year impact? So it's a sheet you saw last year from a formatting and information standpoint. It's the same sheet you received last year, but very important when we're starting to think beyond just that one-year budget, but what are the impacts going forward, and how are we aligning with our strategic plan? So then I would move you on to page 11, which I would tell you that this is a different sheet than what you saw on Friday. What we've tried to do here in the accumulation of the sheet we're giving you this evening is try to look at the proposals that the council has found some agreement in, and through our work sessions express priority and need for. And so what's been updated is the staff proposed amendments. The one item that is important, because the sheet is different than in prior years, it's more difficult. It's not an a la carte menu anymore. It's more a set of defined options. If you start taking options from one of the 6 options and start combining and trading, you will impact the levy and you'll impact expenditure restraint. So what I've tried to do through the staff proposed budget amendment is through what has been presented in our work sessions, as well as what has been proposed through the council, tried to give you an option that meets what I feel or I think the council is looking for, as well as trying to maintain that levy. So the current staff proposal meets and maintains that levy of 3.92% increase, which was what was proposed in your initial prelim budget. What is included in this amendment would be an additional policeman and an additional fire lieutenant instructor. And then those other priorities, which I've talked about, trying to restore that funding into our capital or our equipment replacement fund, and accounting for that ICI savings that we knew about post-budget publication. So on a very high level, are there any questions about the sheet or comments that I should be thinking about? Because we will republish this sheet. The sheet will republish again on November 17th.
So we'll try to incorporate, each of these are independent of one another, but there is a common theme that the council expressed throughout these budget workshops. So we tried to reflect that in there. We can put together another package and show those things, but you really need to look at a package of solutions that you want, because we want to make sure that we're following the levy limits, whatever you're comfortable with from a levy limit standpoint, and then also expenditure restraint, which is a hard cap. We can't exceed that one.
Right.
Everybody gets that. And we as you go through these, we don't want to be in a position where we suddenly say, oh, no, you can't do that because of expenditure restraint. So anything you offer us, we'll analyze and then get back to you in terms of, did we make out okay on expenditure restraint?
So, Trina, help me understand here. So 4 of us had submitted amendment to include the HR generalist enhancement. So then the staff recommendations up here at the top, is that like echoing? I guess
Is that somehow summarizing what staff is recommending, as a separate set of amendments? The orange coded? 'Cause I don't see that in there.
They did not recommend adding the HR specialist,
But 4 of the council members did.
but to keep it under what we had recommended, which was under 4%, they can't do it unless we cut something else out.
And they only have
Right.
one lieutenant and no a second fireman either.
But I
Well,
thought-
it's the one position. It's gonna be moved around and end up being
I wanted to add one,
you are. But-
and 2, an instructor and a fireman.
Well, that's 2.
Lori suggested that too.
Right. Well, again, the council can decide, whatever they want to do, we can certainly do that, but we were trying to make sure we stayed within expenditure restraint. I'm not sure how much this got us over expenditure restraint. We're probably okay a little bit, in terms of room for expenditure restraint. But we were trying to balance it within the levy limits that we thought council would be comfortable with. Council's comfort zone is really up to you. That's,
I think we talked about that, what it would add to the levy if we added the generalist being, what was it, like 2 cents?
Yeah.
Yeah, about to.
It appears there's a consensus to add 1 policeman and a fireman and an instructor to the fire department. Is that,
Is somebody retiring and then we're gonna replace with a lower wage and add another position? What
Oh,
was
whenever-
that, Trina?
oh, you mean those
Retirement
retirement savings? Maybe you can explain the retirement savings.
Yep. So what, we kind of talked about that in one of our initial releases. And so when Tim was looking at his budget, he had some people that he had not anticipated to retire. And so looking at his needs, what he did is analyze the budget that he presented. And through that existing budget, found savings within the dollars that he has already proposed to fund at least 1 full position. If you wanted to add 2 positions, it's about $63,800 of additional funding to be able to fund 2 positions.
Right, yes. So this almost sounds like the savings by somebody retiring is a replacement and not adding one. It's just replacing one that's retiring.
Just one
So it's
position.
not really
But
adding
it's-
one.
We're adding we would still add a firefighter, but if we didn't do it this way, then they wouldn't be able to fill that lieutenant's position.
From a cost perspective, well, when we put our initial budget in July, we didn't know what our retirements were going to be, and we actually had 2 people retire since then that we weren't planning on, and now we have some commitments for other people retiring. So the preliminary budget that we put in, that dollar amount that you see, is actually going to be lower. So not adjusting anything within the current allocation of our budget, we do have enough money in there to fund that additional position. And the reason why that is, it's not a position in it. With those 5 people retiring, we're bringing on 5 new people, and they start out through the steps and they're lower cost. So, and everything else rolls down, their benefit costs, et cetera, and everything comes down. So we have about $85,000 in savings from that, from our budget that we had submitted. So then so that's the other part of it then would be if that covers that 1 position, if we would add the other position, then that would have a levy impact. The other one does not. So that's where the
So
savings.
ultimately, you'll be filling the lieutenant's position that is in here, and you'll be gaining a firefighter plus replacing the 5 retirees.
We would be replacing the retirees, wouldn't necessarily gain that, that's your decision in the budget, to make that, but.
If we add a
but other-
firefighter.
If you added a firefighter, yes, that would be.
That is a new position.
That'd be a
Yes.
new
A
new
position.
head
It
count,
would be
if you will.
6 plus the
It
LT.
would be
Right.
actually 2 positions over our current
Right.
allocated
Right,
amount.
okay.
And the other thing is that, just a little bit of a correction, it's 21, well, it says 21 it's 21 pay periods, because that's the soonest we could get everybody on board.
Okay.
In the-
Yeah,
in the-
thanks,
in-
that's-
Yes.
Okay,
Fire
so-
is an addition of 2 people.
You're not
Right.
adding to the baseline.
Yeah, 2 positions.
Yes, it would be
Oh, so you're
2,
adding one over current staffing level?
yes.
Not replacement, just brand new.
Yes, that would be, there are 5 positions that will be replaced in retirement because they're being hired at a lower salary
Right.
level. That creates some surplus within our current allocation that we had in the preliminary budget.
So, let's see here. So we get this right. You currently have 100 and, what is it, 108?
108.
So if we do this, you would then have 102, or 110, excuse me.
110 if you would put both of those positions in.
Okay. I support that. I don't know where everybody else is at.
Yes.
I mean, we can't vote on it, obviously.
No, but that's the
Wait,
whole idea.
but I
is try to
support
figure
it.
out the
I-
package that
No,
you guys
I
are
support
interested
that,
in.
because that's needed, obviously.
What Trina was trying to put together here is a package that had no impact on the levy as originally proposed and no impact on expenditure restraint. There is admittedly some capacity still available on expenditure restraint, but it would require an increase in the levy. So if you wanted to vary from this package and try to throw another package together, and, we can do multiple packages. We got it on one page. We can give you 2 pages of packages, whatever your comfort zone is, but the idea is we were trying to give you an option that kept things kind of at status quo in terms of fiscal impact. But we do have a little capacity on the expenditure restraint side, and then it's your comfort zone on the tax side.
What's a little?
About 170,000. We have a limit, or expenditure restraint, and we are, as proposed, we are $170,000 under our expenditure restraint cap. The orange option from staff just kept it exactly as proposed in the budget. Doesn't increase the expenditure restraint, doesn't increase the levy any more than what was originally presented to you. So you still have a little room to the degree you wanted to take a look at that.
So we could add, as 4 of the council members have indicated, they desired the HR generalist.
We could put a package together to include that. It would cut into the expenditure restraint, and I'm gonna, let's see, what's the number it would probably comparable to the ICI. So probably about, I think what somebody said, 2 cents on the tax bill. Roughly 2 cents on the tax bill.
Okay. Well, I think, I'll just,
About a
I
point
agree
two.
with Councilmember Palmieri. I think it's important. This is the second, maybe even the third year we've tried to fill this position in the HR.
Ever since we had the discussion of the diversity quota.
Yeah, I think it's needed. I really do. There's a need for it, I guess I would.
So do you
Is an
like-
HR generalist as a diversity coordinator?
HR generalist.
That allows
With the job
flexibility.
description that was sent out,
Yes.
that Mr. Fitzpatrick sent out, I think that's appropriate.
So you like option package 1 with the addition of an HR generalist?
Correct.
Are you okay if that's what I release to you on Friday and start to wipe out some of these other ones? Because I don't want it to
No.
get confusing. And so would your direction then be to fund that with an increased levy?
2 cents on the levy.
Yeah, but there are other places that we can cut some of that. Councilmember Herman, you had a few reductions. I had a couple of reductions.
I would draw you back to that page in the guide into reallocating budgeted funds. I
And some
wanna,
of my reductions are not in that category. They wouldn't count towards,
Let's go to personnel.
Yes.
Let's finish up with personnel. Have we agreed about an additional police officer?
Yep.
yes.
But there's one new,
Just on that question, I don't know if the assistant chief can answer it. Do you anticipate any more retirements than you're already anticipating, unlike the chief?
we had actually a little bit of a reduction. I believe some of the people that were on the fence had some situations change, so it looks like they might just hold them.
Okay. All right. So what you anticipated is where you're at with who's going to go out the first of the year. Okay, thank you.
And that is how, that's what allowed us to fund that one policeman with no impact on the levy or expenditure
Okay.
restraint. So what we're going to reduce is, if you recall, that unclassified retirement payout line.
Mm-hmm.
So that is how that is being added in with no impact.
Okay.
I sent you and Mark an email, I think on Saturday or Sunday. I found an old tax bill from 1995. And my property taxes from 1995 to 2016 were almost identical. My question is now, with all the reassessment, there are gonna be winners and losers. My property went down. Steve, did yours go up or down?
Mine went down.
Mine went down, others went up. So when the tax bill comes, we're kind of the winners.
It's going to be reflective. Yeah, sure.
So it's
There'll be
hard,
winners.
it's hard to think when we talk about what's the impact of a $100,000 average home. Because of this whole property reassessment, I think it's kind of throwing a curve into what do we usually use as, here's the impact on a homeowner because of the assessments. I don't know what happened to your properties, but Mark, you said you went up or down
Mine went down slightly.
lately. So, yeah.
Well, it's, I think, Appleton, or, I can't remember if it was Appleton or Green Bay that just passed their
Green Bay,
budget. It was
2%.
like 2%. It was gonna be $18 on $100,000.
Right.
Here's what I can
And that's
offer.
probably what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you owned a home in 17 and your home was worth $100,000, and in 18 it's still worth $100,000, the city's portion of your tax bill will go up about $18. So assuming a constant value, it's about $18 at the current mill rate that's proposed.
I'm okay with that, I guess.
Yep.
You know, I mean, when you think about it, we're adding some personnel that we need. You know, on a side note, I see Green Bay threw out their 4-year wheel tax.
I saw that
It didn't
too.
make it.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
But they wanna revisit it.
Yeah. So when you just said that, that incorporates the police, the fire, and the HR specialists, or no?
That would incorporate your police and your fire because those have no impact on your levy
Okay.
or expenditure restraint. So we would need, the HR generalist is gonna be minimal. It's gonna still keep you in that $18 range.
Okay,
Yeah, it'll be 2 cents.
all right.
Nobody will miss that.
Oh, it might be a gumball someplace there, Jay, for the kids.
I don't think you can even get a
Gumball for
gumball
2
for 2
cents?
cents.
Maybe when
No,
you're a kid.
one cent each, 2 gumballs, right? One for each.
Like 50 cents now.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
3 cents.
Oh, there you go.
So what we're hearing
That's
is
something like McDonald's these days.
take the HR generalist, move it up into there.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else?
And leave the rest of the package as is.
The rest of the orange package?
Can you just talk a little, just give me a little more explanation on this second line item here, capital project fund, restore partial prior year funding? What is that, Mark?
You may recall that I'll draw your attention to, what page, Trina?
It's under finance.
Okay, this is our contribution to the capital improvement program, and we have been doing $1 million annually, and we reduced that to just under $900,000. What we're suggesting is that with the ICI holiday, that we move we move those additional funds directly into restoring some of that capital outlay. The idea is when you contribute cash into the capital outlay, the capital improvement program, you're borrowing less. And we want to maintain that practice. It's on page 31, thanks Trina. On page 31, you'll see that for 2017, it was budgeted at $1 million, and we dropped it back to about the 2016 level, 891,000. What we're proposing is to get it up a little over 950,000 using the ICI savings. The ICI savings, we've enjoyed this holiday for almost 10 years now. There's no guarantee it would go out. I'd be reluctant to suggest that you use it for a permanent position because Murphy's Law will kick in, and
Yeah.
next year the ICI holiday goes away and the funding for it goes away. If the ICI holiday ends in 2019, for example, then we know exactly where we put it in and we know where we can take it out. We can take it out of this funding source. I just hate to say we got a dedicated funding source when it's really not a dedicated funding source. It's just that from an insurance standpoint, what's the term I'm thinking of but just from an analysis standpoint, time's against us. One day the ICA holiday will end.
Okay. And then,
Thanks.
Mark, you just want to explain the increase in the training for you?
That is, I overlooked the fact that one of my training sessions I thought was going to be in Illinois, it's going to be in Ohio. So I wanted to make
Okay.
sure that that was covered.
Okay.
And my sister will only let me stay at her house only so many days, so
Okay.
she grows tired of me very quickly, so I won't be staying here the whole time.
I just have one question under Public Works. We've got reduced fuel and salt by 25%. Is that's kind of a wish? We have no idea what's going to happen with fuel prices or the weather and.
Well, I think what we heard from council, though, is that as long as we have a package, then these packages are gonna fall off. I mean,
Right.
Councilmember Herman is,
Those are just recommendations.
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so there's only like $3,000 reduction here on contractual services. If we don't reduce it by $3,000, what's the impact on the levy?
that was something we talked about earlier with the city attorney's budget, that's okay to cut that. That's not an issue. It's
Yes?
okay.
Okay.
Just making sure.
Yeah, no. Oh, I thought you were.
Everybody good?
Yeah, I can sleep tonight, I think.
And you're comfortable with funding the one additional position in fire?
So one
Yes.
police, one fire, one HR generalist, and then the other miscellaneous ones that are
And then
in.
that
thought there were
also
two additional
incorporates,
fire.
too, the
Two.
lieutenant instructor, right?
Well, the lieutenant instructor is the one that's getting added.
But we
we're
wanted one
adding
added to the
one
baseline.
more.
Tim, you said it'll be a head count of 110 from 108, correct?
It's two positions.
It's the fireman and the LT.
Because we wanted 6 instead of the 5. that
Can you
were
get both
replaced.
out of that? Tim, you can't escape. You shouldn't have left.
You did, you just,
I thought,
No, he needs
Oh, yeah,
68,000,
It would,
Only got 87.
63,800 to fund it. So you would need to fund a HR generalist plus an additional 63,800 to get 2 in fire.
Yes.
So that would add another, not quite 2 cents.
okay,
With that and the HR generalist, you're probably looking at a total of 4 cents.
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's-
Is that your comfort zone? It's, at this point,
Gotta do it.
it's
penny-
in the rail. It's
I don't want
for-
to
it's
say
for
pennies
you
on the
guys.
dollar,
Need
but
more than one extra.
it's,
I mean, that's the minimum.
it's what we need. That's the bottom line.
Yeah, that
These
is
are-
the minimum.
These are needed positions. I mean,
as
still
well as
have-
police with the one.
yes, the police was one. I mean, and you say, okay, how come police only got one? Well, police got 4 last year, or 3 last year when they put that unit together, and fire department hasn't had an increase, unfortunately, since
You didn't get a-
2003.
You didn't get additional people, did you, for that
Yeah.
unit?
Last year.
Yeah,
One.
No,
one.
one,
One.
one I think they got.
that's
last
a person, that's not people.
And yearly, we'll probably have to look at this too and keep on adding, because I mean.
Well,
everything's gonna
it's
keep
one
on
of the
increasing.
goals I've got written down for C major. Is put together a long-range package. We'll get there, different time.
I have to admit, there's more and more going on that requires police in the city. I mean, it's getting more and
And
more
fire.
with drugs, shootings, and
Fire responds to some of those things as well, so.
we're becoming, quite the traffic for all the drugs out of Milwaukee going to Green Bay and wherever else they're coming from.
Well, as the city grows up more, it's gonna continuously get bigger
Mark?
and bigger.
And
Does,
rents.
I know we're coming up with the contracts for the ambulance providing in the townships. That money, does that go into their, where does that go? Is that an operation budget,
That goes right into the general fund.
general fund of the city?
Yes.
Okay. So those contracts, are they like a,
I'm gonna
In
defer to,
January, when are they
chief
Will
on
be
that.
the current contract ends at the end of next year, the end of 2018.
okay,
So we plan on, much prior to the budget, start negotiating with them in spring for next year on that contract.
I told Tim it's a bucket list item for him.
Yep. So we can get that done, so you have that as, not as a variable, as a constant as you move forward for the 2019 budget on that to work with.
okay. And is it a negotiated type thing, or do we send them a proposal and it's yay or nay, or how does that kind of work?
We give them, the way it has been is we've given them a proposal on providing those services.
You look at page 6 of the, on the revenue page, it just shows that town ambulance aid is approximately $36,000 annually.
Okay. And that's all the townships that we cover, right, as a whole?
Everything but
Correct.
Menasha.
Yeah. Well, we cover what, Black Wolf, Nakaimai, Algoma?
The town of Black Wolf, town of Nakaimai, town of Utica, town of Algoma, town of Amro, town of Rushford, town of Winnicott, town of Poygan, and the village of Winnicott, and the city of Amro.
Okay.
I have used your services in Amro.
Yep. Okay. And that's
we're-
been, that's basically been the same town, we haven't added any townships in the
No.
last bunch of years.
No, that's been, we have
All the
not added
townships
any
we
since
have.
2004,
Oh, no, there's more than that.
or 3, when we entered that contract.
But those cities continue to grow too, just like we do.
Yeah,
So
they
the needs
grow, and I said the growth in demand is exceeding the growth in population. They're not following it direct. If we put them on a chart, the demand is growing faster than the population.
It's
but
tracking the aging of the
Yes,
population. That's just the
it's all those
reality.
things I talked about, it's demographic.
Careful with that age.
Yeah, it was your grandson, it wasn't you that got,
And my mother. I had both ends of the spectrum.
And maybe this is just a side note, we got a couple of minutes here. Assistant Chief, are we getting asked by other agencies for assistance through the police department too? I mean, like mutual aid, not so much mutual aid in a sense, but sheriff's office asking for OPD to come out on certain things, or other communities might be asking some services from our police department too?
Yeah, we get requested for our canine. That's a mutual aid. We are now fortunate enough to staff the various shifts. So more and more, we're able to take care of our own situation. And as the smaller agencies are looking to increase their equipment, their dogs, their canine programs. So we assist a lot with that. DREs, the drug recognition experts, we have several on staff. The state only allows so much training for DREs to be saturated in an area the program is meant to share. So a drug to driving, with all the prescriptions and the drugs coming in, we see a lot more than that, of that than OWIs when you and I were on the road.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we didn't have drug driving then. So we see a lot of those services as well. We have a lot of mutual aid. I can tell you I had to drive to the village of Fox Crossing yesterday and follow up to a case that involved Bay Street. boundaries are being crossed all over. We're putting units together. If you're not aware of it, we have a CART team, a Child Abduction Response Team. I had the privilege of serving on that board for several years, but that's a team that's put together multi-agencies. So our resources are all pooling. It's just a constant need. Whoever needs something, we go. At the state level, we've been asked for equipment as well as officers for the various events, protests, and other things that have occurred
Okay.
over the years.
Okay, very good. And I think that's important to know as we move forward, that those resources are being tapped more and more and more.
They
So
are.
that we need to keep thinking on, outside the box a little bit. So, thank you.
Out of courtesy to Councilmember Peck, since he's not here, I guess I'd be reluctant to remove his without his consent. But the idea would be that, based on this discussion, the orange one from staff is really now council's, the five of you's consensus, that's gonna add everything shown in orange plus the extra firefighter plus the HR generalist. That'll be the package. Out of courtesy to Mr. Peck, I'd say we could leave his in there. He'll see what you did. I'm sure he'll consent to going along with that. But he's the only one not here who presented something.
Right, but
So
it looks like he almost has the same thing.
he's really close,
Right
yeah.
there, so,
Um,
yeah.
And then we have a package that we will be able to provide you for the 28th, because our meeting is after Thanksgiving. But we'll be putting out a package both this Friday and then the following Wednesday for you, for your consideration.
Okay.
You're not limited to what's been discussed tonight. Something else comes up, please forward it
As far
to
as
Larson.
right now, the CIP's staying intact with no changes?
Yeah, we're awaiting to see what happens. If something happens, we'll incorporate the resolution that council adopted, and Trina already has it ready. We're ready to do it, assuming that we get some word. I wish I could tell you I knew when that word was gonna come, but this is the package that we have. So encourage you to take a look at Exhibit 2, but this reflects what we had. I had a good discussion at the GOEDC board meeting this morning. I think they understand the RLF, and I explained to them that the more flexibility we retain for the future, we don't know if we're gonna need more money for park improvements over there, if we're gonna need more money for perhaps RLF down the road, but we'll have borrowing capacity, because we haven't exceeded our 11.4. I'm really happy that with everything we did not exceed our 11.4. Is that correct, Trina?
That is correct.
So we have that still, that capacity that we have not tapped into, whether it's we need it for additional park improvements, because the Parks Board still has to take a look at what we're gonna do with the remainder of the property.
Right.
And there'll be, and there may need
But
to be more.
it sounds like from what Mr. Mauer was saying at the Parks Board meeting the other night, there may be some stormwater additions that could
And we have
then
to take-
affect what's left of the golf course.
And we have to take a look at that. Mr.
Right.
Ferris, our stormwater engineer, is taking a look at that. There's still other things that we're.
Yeah, do some more digging before we dig. There you go. I like that.
I
So,
can dig
so, in other words, you're still gonna take the 1,322,000 from the revolving loan fund.
And I think
But
we
leave room
understand-
on the end that if we have to geo borrow more, we can do that?
Yeah, and if you take a look at the average RLF loans, they're about 75 to 90,000. We have 11 to 12 RLF loans we can do. So we do have capacity there. There are some TIFs closing in the next few years. That's also
Are we
based on.
putting any 18 money in the RLF in our budget?
No, because TIF 7, basically, we're tapping out, and no other TIFs are closing. But 15, Alan,
There's candidates that we have to determine, 15, 17, and 18 potentially.
so we have up to 3 TIFs.
10 and 12, 12 could even be.
So we have multiple TIFs over the next few years.
But we're
that
still
we'll be able to
using
do.
some of that TIF money when it closes for our healthy neighborhood initiatives too.
But
right?
that is totally separate. The last year of that TIF exclusively goes to healthy neighborhoods. That's law. And it's not healthy neighborhoods, but it's housing. And so
Housing.
we call it our healthy neighborhoods program. That's totally independent of the residual money
Okay.
at the closure of a TIF.
Okay.
All right, that is it. Thank you, everyone, Trina, for all your hard work, staff for all
Yes,
your
thank
hard
you.
work.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for all your support.
Thank you. Jake?
So we will,
Promise? Keep your job.
Seven
Eight o'clock.
Appreciate it, Steve.
I gotta stop and get snacks though.